Hey, it's James Duthie from TSN, and you are listening to Vibe 105.
Vibe Talks. More than just music.
Hey everybody, this is Giancarlo Aulino and Aaron Zaretsky reporting for Vibe 105 with a Sports VIBEtalks segment where we're going to be talking about all things hockey today. To help us out, we're happy to be joined by our guest. He is a multiple-time award winner, and he is an author of multiple books. He's James Duthie of TSN. How you doing, James?
Giancarlo, Aaron, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Now, James, during this whole pandemic, like a lot of people have been keeping busy doing other things. You decided to do something else. You wrote a book, Beauties, Hockey's Greatest Untold Stories. So what was the process behind that?
Yeah, I wish I would have waited till the pandemic hit to write it because I had way more time. With these books, the process is long, right? So I think I started talking to the publishers maybe maybe it was May or June, so almost 2 years ago coming up, and started writing it in September of last year, and it was almost finished when the pandemic hit, which was kind of a bummer because, like you said, I could have written the whole thing. I wasted 4 good months, but it helped me actually finish it off and make sure. There's a lot of things that go with writing a book, guys, like just the editing process, getting photos, for instance, for this book, things like that. So it's a time-consuming process, but I just wanted, as I say in the book, I just wanted to write a book of great hockey stories, like nothing else. I'd sat on that panel all those years, and you sit next to all these great characters, and everybody's got great stories. And so I thought, could I write a book that was nothing else except great stories? You know, it wasn't an autobiography or a biography of somebody else. It was just, tell me a great story, and that will be your chapter. And that's what I set out to do.
And speaking of those stories, one of them is a story about Sidney Crosby, given the nickname Darryl. For those who haven't read your book yet, can you just elaborate on that story?
Yeah, I don't mind telling it. Back when I was doing, before Christmas time, they didn't want me to give away too many of the stories when they were trying to sell books. I don't mind now. That one, I had heard about, sort of in passing, someone had mentioned to me a long time ago that in junior they called Sid Darryl. But it never really got widespread at all, right? Had you guys heard that before you read the book or heard it in the book?
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah, it's Sid the Kid and that's it. So it was funny. There's a chapter in the book about John Cooper, which is one of my favorite stories when he was coaching in the minors. And it involves a carjacking and a brawl and all sorts of crazy stuff that happens. And at the end of my interview with John, I said, is there anybody that I should talk to that you think is a great character? Because I wasn't just looking for the superstars like Sidney Crosby or Wayne Gretzky or whatever. I was looking for, anybody who had great stories. And so he said, you have to talk to this guy, Eric Nielsen. He was the craziest player that I ever coached. He had him in Norfolk. And when I called Eric, I didn't even realize when I called him that he was Sid's teammate in Rimouski and his roommate, and he's the one with a few others who gave him the name Darryl. And it's a pretty simple name. Sid's first game when he showed up in Rimouski, he had 8 points early in the third period. And so all the veterans, including Nielsen, were sitting in the stands, and they said, we got to give this guy a nickname. And one of them said, who's the guy with the Leafs that got 10 points in a game? And they said, Darryl Sittler. And he goes, okay, let's call him Darryl. So as simple a story as that. But they called him Darryl, and I think, there's great little side stories in the book about it. They called him Darryl. Eric Nielsen still will only call him Darryl to this day. He will never use the word Sid or Crosby, even when he's talking to me or you. And Sid actually wrote Darryl inside his gloves his first season in the NHL, and actually gave each of those guys a set of his gloves. So, to most of the world, he's Sid, and to those 5 guys, he'll always be Darryl.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, with James Duthie here on Vibe 105, I'm Aaron Zaretsky, and with Giancarlo Aulino. James, so with a shortened season this year, only 56 games, and Canadian teams are only playing each other, is this the year finally for the Toronto Maple Leafs to win their first playoff series since 2004?
Man, I'd gamble a large amount if I had the answer to that, Aaron. It's I don't know. I don't think this Canadian division, and the one thing I like about it through 2 weeks or whatever, is that it looks like it's going to be pretty even. I really think with the way the schedule works, when you have to play 2 games and 3 games at a time against one team, it's really hard to sweep those games, right? The teams are all so close. And so I think in the end, that's going to make the division really tight. Toronto, as we're talking today, did not look very good in their last game. But, some nights Edmonton looks awful. Winnipeg hasn't looked great early in the season. So I think it's kind of going to be this way all year long. Toronto certainly has the talent to do it and come out of that division and make a run at the Cup. But I don't think we've seen anything. If they'd have come out of the gate and gone 5-0, and scored 25 goals and had 6 against, then maybe I could make some bold statement. But I don't think we've seen anything different really about the Leafs than other years so far, right? So we haven't seen anything to prove that they're going to be different. And frankly, we won't have an answer to that question until the playoffs. I think they're better. Are they good enough? If they get in the first round matchup with, who knows, Calgary or whatever, it's going to be the same old thing. It'll be goaltending and a few plays here and there to probably decide it, right?
Yeah, James, also you're talking about that, this Canadian division has been interesting because a lot of people are saying Edmonton might have the most pressure because of McDavid, Draisaitl, but you look at the Leafs and all their offensive firepower. Do you think if Edmonton or Toronto don't get out of this division, we can see even more drastic changes than we've seen in the past?
Yeah, it's funny. Drastic changes are hard to make now in the NHL, right? Let's say, take both those examples. So if the Leafs flame out in the first round again, what are you going to do, really? Probably that's the end of Freddie Anderson, and you go out and get a new goalie. But you're not getting rid of Austin Matthews. Maybe, depending on what happens this season, you do something drastic like, trade a Nylander or Marner or one of those other guys. I guess possibly, but it's very rare that teams in the NHL mess up the core. And all the work is done on the outsides, right? It's all done with the 4th to 7th defenseman and the 3rd and 4th lines. And sometimes 1 year you have that combination that clicks perfectly. St. Louis had it. Tampa just had sheer talent, I think, as much as anything else. But all the little additions they made last year all kind of worked, right? And I think you never know when all those pieces are going to fit together. So in Toronto's case, does Joe Thornton and Wayne Simmons and TJ Brody and the likes, does that all fit together and suddenly come springtime they're on a roll and go on a cup run? And in Edmonton, same deal. You're not going to get rid of McDavid or Draisaitl at the end of the year if they flame out in the first round again. But you're going to have to tweak again with so does Kyle Turris give what they wanted on, a third line type situation? It's not like, it's so different from the NBA where you just blow it up, right?
Yeah.
And then a bunch of stars go to one team or whatever. It's just not like that. And it's so rare that a core player these days, like a top 3 or 4 player, gets dealt. So basically the off seasons are all about nibbling around the edges and seeing what you can do to change things up that way. And I think that's pretty much would be the situation. Besides coaching changes or dramatic GM changes, I don't really think there's a ton you can do except that.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, looking at Montreal, Carey Price's name has always been brought up. So if Montreal were to have another season where they're not really progressing, do you see Carey Price being on the way out?
I just don't know how somebody else to take a whatever it is, $10 million cap on maybe the cap's not that high, but for a goalie, as great as he is, there's only so many teams that can do that, particularly in a world now where the cap teams are so tight to the cap, right? So you'd almost need a team that had a lot of cap room that suddenly decided they were on the cusp and could afford to do, and goaltending was the one thing they were missing probably, are the only teams that could do something like that. It would be difficult for a contending team that's one piece away to go out and get a Carey Price. So almost further to my conversation before, and maybe this is a bigger conversation where there's not enough movement in hockey. Like the NBA is, I kind of like it. I like guys staying in teams for a long time, but it makes things like trade deadline not nearly as exciting, right? Yeah. The one thing that the NBA has going for it is that you have these colossal moves, you know, where James Harden, one of the best players in the game, goes to Brooklyn, and you know, the year before that, it's Anthony Davis to LA with LeBron. I don't know that's great for the whole of the league, but it's great for shows like this, right, where we can talk about it. It just doesn't happen much in the NHL. I think if it were to happen this year, it'd be more likely somebody like a Patrick Kane. It's got to be a prime star who can still play, who's now playing for a team that is clearly rebuilding and at the beginning of a rebuild, right? And that's what happened with Mark Stone being traded, Carlson being traded in the Ottawa ways, and that's why I think you could see someone like a Patrick Kane moving, possibly, because he still has value. He's still a superstar in his prime, and Chicago's going nowhere for the next 2-3 years, right?
With James Duthie on Vibe 105. James, an issue that has been brought up regarding current players being picked off waivers is this 14-day quarantine for Americans entering Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So that got me thinking of when the trade deadline comes around, will this impact Canadian teams from making trades with U.S. teams?
Yeah, no, it's a very valid question, and somebody raised it to me the other night. I think the current rules are if a player's dealt, that it's about 7 or 8 days if you were to come into Canada, and you have to have 4 negative tests over that time or something along those lines. So will it handicap Canadian teams? Possibly, I suppose. So if you're going to go out and get, Joe Smith, anonymous player, and you're looking at it, and there's 15 games left after the trade deadline, and he's going to have to miss 4 in quarantine. So now there is definitely going to be some weighing of that going on. But I don't know in particular, the difference between going from Canada to the States or whatever, or within the States. Maybe there's ways to avoid, maybe they were going to miss a couple of games going from state to state anyway, depending on certain rules. So I don't know that it's something that's going to completely ruin it for Canadian teams. I think you're probably right in bringing it up, that it may be a factor and maybe something they have to deal with. Let's hope that by April, what's trade deadline, 10th, 12th, something like that? I know it's the Monday after the Masters, which doesn't work very well for me, by the way. But, let's hope by then that maybe the quarantine rules that we have enough people vaccinated, and maybe things have gotten a little bit better by then, that the quarantine rules are more equal. Maybe it's only a 4-day quarantine or a 5-day quarantine when you come into the country, or if you have a negative test, the day you leave the States, and when you get to Canada, you have another negative test, you're fine. That's what would be, I think, the NHL's hope, and my hope more, is that they've kind of figured it out a little more by then, because you're right, Aaron, it's a bit of a problem right now.
Hopefully they could figure out, because if they don't figure out, then be like, oh, like if for example, like the Leafs or Montreal, Vancouver, be like, what? You're telling me we can only trade with only Canadian teams, because like if we want like a defenseman or a certain goalie, U.S. teams are available, but can't, so it's just.
I think that it's probably, the fact that we're talking about it, the NHL has certainly probably been talking about it as well, and they will try to make things as fair as possible. In those situations, because you can't have a situation where Canadian teams can just trade with each other, because then we'll just have no trades whatsoever, and you'll see me crying on trade deadline day for 8 hours.
With James Duthie of TSN here on Vibe 105, on Giancarlo Aulino and Aaron Zaretsky. James, you brought up there like Tradecentre. Just this time of year, like you do those marathon shifts, free agent frenzy, Tradecentre. What are those days like for you, and how early do they start?
It's funny, Giancarlo, I used to dread them. There was a time earlier in my career where, like a couple of weeks before I break out in hives, I just didn't, because it's such a long day. but I sort of came around a few years ago where I just kind of accepted it for what it was. I used to get worried that there wouldn't be any trades, but we have so many commentators. It'll be tricky this year, by the way, in the middle of the pandemic, that you can't put necessarily 20 guys inside the studio. So we're going to have to get a little more creative. But I just take it as a day to celebrate hockey. No, for the most part, last year was actually pretty busy. We were steady on trade deadline, but a couple of years before that, it was really crickets. And people were saying, why are you doing the show for 10 hours? But the ratings are always really good, right? Because I think that most people just kind of love watching guys sitting around talking about hockey. And what might happen is just as enticing as what usually doesn't happen. So I like it now. It is a long day. By about 3 or 4 o'clock, my brain stops functioning and I have trouble putting together a sentence. But I enjoy, for my standpoint, if I have Ray Ferraro and Jeff O'Neill and Dave Poulin and Mike Johnson or Jamie McLennan or whatever next to me, I could just shoot the breeze about hockey with those guys for hours, right? And in the end, that's kind of what you're doing.
Yeah, and also like with the Canadian division, all these trades, if there's more excitement around trade deadline, and do you think there'll be a thing where the NHL will look at it and be like, you know what, maybe we can do this Canadian division as a permanent deal?
Well, there certainly seems to be a buzz about that right now. Obviously, it's different this year, right? Because of the format and the fact that they'll go and stay 3 days or 4 days, 5 days in one city and play 3 games. The travel is actually less for all of the Canadian teams than it would be in a normal season. But you cannot, obviously, let's say things are back to normal next year, but you want to still have the Canadian division. You still have to play, you have to go back to the old format of, one game in Pittsburgh and one game Pittsburgh coming to Toronto or whatever it may be. And so now the travel gets a little trickier. I mean, I guess you could do back-to-backs, only go to Vancouver twice if you were Ottawa or Toronto and vice versa, and play back-to-back games there. So it's doable. And I think it's definitely got some legs, I think. I love the idea. It feels like every night is almost must-watch hockey, right? Because we'd only get an all-Canadian matchup once or twice a week last year. And now you have them every single night, 2 or 3 of them. So I kind of want to reserve judgment till the end of the season before I make a final statement as to whether I want this to be a full-time thing. I want to make sure that it's not too much of a good thing by the end of the year. But as long as they can work out the travel. But I think that's going to be a real issue because you're going to get a division like the East or whatever where nobody's, they're busing to games because everything's really close. And then you got the Canadian division having to travel across this big country all the time. I think it would be really tricky for the schedule makers.
This is Aaron Zaretsky and Giancarlo Aulino with TSN hockey broadcaster James Duthie here on Vibe 105. James, during your career, you have covered many hockey games, some Super Bowls, Grey Cups, MLS Cups, some Masters. What would you say are your most memorable moments of your career?
Yeah, that's a great one. The number one I always say is the 2010 Olympics. I was a real Olympic geek when I was a kid. I love the Olympics. I watch every second of it, and particularly the Winter Olympics. And to be able to host an Olympics in my own country and to be, 35 feet away, I think probably we had our set was right behind the net. And so we were right there when Crosby scored, and that'll be tough to pass in my lifetime. 20 million Canadians were watching that moment, right? There'll never be a higher rated TV show in the history of our lifetime for Canada. So that's probably number one, but you mentioned a bunch that are kind of all the NBA finals with the Raptors was a real treat for me because my first job at TSN, people don't remember, was hosting NBA. When Vince Carter was a rookie, I hosted it for 3 years. And so to get to cover that final was really cool. The MLS Cups were awesome. I played a ton of soccer as a kid. So especially the one that Toronto won in Toronto was really something. And the Masters. I mean, even the Masters in the World Juniors are probably my 2 favorite events of every year. the World Juniors is always great. And the Masters is just, it's kind of the beginning of summer in Canada, you feel like, right? Everything's ahead of you when the Masters hits. And when Tiger won a couple of years ago, to be there for that, I think was, so, I don't know, top 5, the Olympics, Raptors, Tigers win at the Masters. There's been some great Super Bowls. I have been super lucky, guys. I will say that. I never dreamt I could cover that range of things or even go to those events when I was a kid. So to be able to have been there and witness some just, mind-blowing events I feel super lucky.
That's incredible. And you also made an appearance on the big screen in Goon, Last of the Enforcers.
Right.
What was that experience like, being on a movie set?
Well, the funny thing was I never really got to be on a movie set. So they basically came to us, and we filmed all of that in one day in our studio. So for me, it was almost just like any other day. TJ Miller, who was my analyst in the movie, who any of your listeners who don't know TJ, he's been in all sorts of things, right? Deadpool, and he was the bartender in Deadpool. I think your generation would know him mostly for that, but a really good, funny, Silicon Valley, I think, a bunch of great roles. So he was my analyst, this ex-hockey player, and when they came, I thought that we shot these scenes and ad-lib most of them. We had some lines to sort of advance the script, but Jay Baruchel was there, and terrific guy, and that actually came about with I saw Jay in an award show. We passed each other on the red carpet, and I was a fan of his work, and I guess he watched me a lot on hockey, and he was talking about Goon 2. I said, you should put the panel in Goon 2, and I guess that stuck in his mind. And originally the whole panel was supposed to be in, but then, the Hollywood execs get involved, and it get carved down to me and TJ Miller. But so we shot it in about, I would say, 2 hours, and they would feed us some lines, and TJ Miller was ad-libbing all these lines, most of which are in the movie, and I was having trouble not cracking up because he was so funny. So I pretty much walked away from that saying maybe they'll use one line or a couple of scenes in the movie, and then I go to the premiere, and we're in the first scene of the movie, and then we're in 20, basically every single line we shot that day is in the movie, which never happens in the movie, right? So I thought that was pretty cool. Baruchel's a great guy, and for me to just be a small part of that, I earned big Hollywood money, $683 for my role in Goon. So,
pretty good.
Yeah.
Nice payday.
It's fun. It's still people will still, I guess people find that on Netflix or whatever, or watch it on an airplane, and people still come up to me and talk to me more about that than probably anything I do on TSN. That, and we were on Letterkenny, so I think those get the most hype.
And James, do you think you're going to be back on the big screen more? Could we be seeing you venture into Hollywood?
I don't know, Giancarlo. With this face, it's not exactly Brad Pitt, So I think there's a limited niche roles for me. But hey, I do something if somebody asks me, for sure.
That's great. Once again, for those just joining us here on Vibe 105, this is Giancarlo Aulino and Aaron Zaretsky with James Duthie at TSN. James, another memorable thing that a lot of people seem to enjoy is going on YouTube and looking at clips of the panel with Torts, because he seemed to just enjoy that role. What was it like when John Tortorella was on the panel and the quiz?
Well, I don't think he did enjoy it. I think it's funny how memory, those clips get played. There's about 2 or 3 clips when Torts was on the panel, and he said the quiz sucked a couple times, and those get played so much in our top 10 lists that I think it almost distorts the reality of what Torts was like, because Torts, first of all, I love the guy. He was a super nice guy, completely different than I think what people think from the rants that happen after the games. And for the most part, coaches are different when they're not coaching. I think the pressure of being an NHL coach, nobody really understands. It's 24/7, right? And when they're away from the job, they're such nice guys for the most part, right? And they're laid back. And in Tort's case, I believe that the only reason he took the job at TSN was was to show that he wasn't this raving lunatic that you see in the post-game scrums. I think that's why he took the job. He wanted to show people that I can be a quiet, rational guy. So if you watched every appearance that Torts made on TSN, he was only with us for a few months before he got the Rangers job. I think the Rangers job, I lose track, but he was kind of boring, and he wanted to be boring. He really, he didn't have those wild opinions that he has post-game. And I was really fighting to get stuff out of him. But it was only once in a while when he got really engaged that he'd get to be Torts. But I just love the guy. He didn't really want to be on TV. The funny part is I can remember sitting around having pizza before a game, and it was me, Bob, and Torts. And Torts says, I love this. I love every part of this. I love hanging around with you guys, talking hockey, eating pizza. I just wish I didn't have to go on TV. And I remember going, well, Torts, that's kind of the reason you're here, is the TV part. But so he wasn't, I don't think he was as outlandish as people remember because of those clips. But he's a good guy. And it's funny, whenever I text Torts about something, whatever he responds, he always finishes the text with "the quiz sucks." So it never leaves him. He's in the book too, and that's one of my favorite chapters in the book. Is Torts tells a couple of stories, and Marty St. Louis and Brad Richards tell a couple of stories about Torts that are some of my favorites.
And the TSN panel, like you guys were a part of a few music videos that you did a few years ago. Which is also funny and gone viral on YouTube, especially the puck over glass one, which is just so hilarious. How did that idea come about of just, let's just have some fun and make a music video?
So I grew up in, the time of David Letterman, and people always ask me what sportscaster influenced you the most, and I don't know that a sportscaster really did. David Letterman was super popular. He used to have a daytime show and then a late night show on NBC way before the CBS show. And I got into Dave super early. And so I was, 15, 16 years old watching Dave every single night. And he really was one of the guys who brought in stupid humor. And so I grew up on that. And I had a group of friends who were all hilarious, all funnier than me. And they were really into that too. And so it was always just dumb things. We'd make our own dumb videos, dumb pranks all the time. And so when I got into journalism, I was a news reporter for a bunch of years and had to be pretty serious. But when I got a job out in Vancouver where they let me do silly stuff. And I think that was more my personality. I would do sort of the dumb story that ended the newscast every day. And when I got to TSN, I wanted to keep that part of it, I think. And I was lucky enough to have bosses that said, hey, try some stuff. And, I did a few things that you guys probably never saw because it happened before social media, right? So they never got spread around. You can probably find them deep on YouTube, where I did a story about a coach farm in Ottawa that was just completely ridiculous. And sorry, I'm getting long-winded here, but puck over glass, for instance, we used to have a tote board behind us. We were counting all the puck over glass penalties. There would always be a penalty every year that was kind of the penalty, right? One year was goalie interference, I think. Next year was puck over glass. And we started the tote board, and then we put fire on the tote board, and we were running out of things. And I was driving home for work one night just trying to think of what was the next level I could take this to. And I thought about a music video. And in that half an hour drive home, I came up with the song in my mind. I used to be in a band in high school. I never had any musical talent, but I did have the ability to come up with tunes and stuff. And write tunes in my head. So by the time I was home, I had a song in my head, and I literally grabbed a piece of paper and wrote the lyrics down in about 30 seconds. And I have a musician that works with me named Lester McLean, who's in the Puck Over Glass video and is on my podcast. And Lester's a really talented musician. And so basically I called up Lester's voicemail and just sang the song into his voicemail and said, could you put this to music? And Lester, within a week, had the song, and we recorded the video. And that's basically how it works. And that's one of my favorite things. And one of the things I love about TSN is they let us do this stuff. There's actually another one called Don't Take My Goal Away, which I don't know if you guys have seen, but for whatever reason, it didn't get as big as Puck Over Glass, but I think the video is almost funnier and dumber because we did it as a boy band video with Jeff O'Neill and Marty Biron and Jamie McLennan and I. We kind of did it like an NSYNC Backstreet Boys video. And that came out of the idea of the first year of video review, how all these goals were getting called back for some piddly little 1-inch offside. And so we did a song called Don't Take My Goal Away, which I think is hilarious. It's just the dumbest thing ever. But yeah, we did a bunch of things with Roberto Luongo, who was kind of my partner in crime. And those are some of the favorite things. We did a Hangover piece, a Hangover parody with the LA Kings. And some of my greatest memories at TSN, like I think when I'm all done this job, you're probably not going to think back and say, oh, Bob, you and I did that great panel that one night, during the Leafs Canucks game. But I think those things will probably be remembered for a while. And I don't mind that because they're really stupid, but sports is supposed to be fun, right? And so that's why
that's right. Sports entertainment.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, those are good times.
Fantastic stuff. And just before we wrap things up here, how can listeners purchase your book, Beauties, Hockey's Greatest Untold Stories, and follow you on social media?
Thank you very much for asking. Beauties should be available in most of your chapters. Where are you guys exactly again?
Toronto.
Oh, you guys are in Toronto, right?
Yeah.
I couldn't. You're right in Toronto, like downtown Toronto?
Oh, no, Vaughan and North York area.
So, yeah, most of the chapters will have them in Toronto. I know some provinces have been sold out, but most of your chapters are Indigo, or you can just order. Amazon has it. And as far as me, TSN James Duthie on Twitter, and I think it's TSN Duthie on Instagram. I have a TikTok account now too, but I haven't made a TikTok video yet. So my daughter's trying to get me into the TikTok, but I'm not so good.
Yeah, that's great.
And on Tinder, I'm just kidding.
Well, that's great. The books are flying off the shelves, James. So maybe you'll want to write another book. Is there any plan for a follow-up on that?
A lot of people have been asking about Beauties too. What I told you guys earlier, I'll probably do it at some point. It's so much work to do a book, and you have to wrap your head around. I've written 4 books now, and every time I take about 3 years off in between, because it's just a year of a lot of work. Plus, I still have to do my TV job, so I need to decompress for a little bit, and then decide if I'm ready to write again. But I think somewhere down the line there'll be a Beauties too, probably.
That's great. Well, James, really appreciate you taking the time, sharing your time, coming on here on Vibe 105 to talk about this with us, and we wish you all the best.
Boys, all the best to you guys on Vibe 105 and all your listeners, and much appreciate the time.
Thanks a lot. That was James Duthie of TSN. Now we're going to send it back to the studio for more programming right here on Vibe 105.
And now back to your Vibe 105.